Chapter 7. The night of July 1st had been dry, with no dew to speak of. As the sun rose, the summer heat settled in on the plateau. Langford woke up feeling refreshed and happy after breakfast, but his whistle was interrupted by Paiute, who exclaimed, "Ugh!" and pointed to Black Topper. The mare had slipped her halter and was heading towards the opening in the cedars, with her head held high and her ears straight up. "Topper!" called Mescal, but the mare didn't stop. Langford ran after her, confused by her strange behavior. "I've never seen Topper act like this before," said Mescal, "and she didn't even finish her oats. Look at Wolf." The white dog had also noticed something was off and stood warily, shifting his nose. Sniffing the air, he turned in circles, his body stiffening as he pointed his head towards the east. "Hold, Wolf, hold!" called Mescal as the dog began to run. "Ugh!" grunted Paiute. "Listen, Jack, did you hear?" whispered the girl. "Hear what?" "Listen." The warm breeze blew down from the crags, rustling the cedars and carrying fragrant smoke from the campfire. Suddenly a low, prolonged whistle pierced the silence, a sound unlike any he had heard before. The whistle came again, sharper this time, and he reached for his rifle. "Wild mustangs," said Mescal. "No," corrected Paiute, shaking his head. "Clear, clear." "Jack, he says horse, horse." "It's a wild horse." The whistle rang out a third time, strong and fiery, the unmistakable challenge of a stallion. Black Topper reared up, and Jack ran to the rise above the camp to get a better look. "Oh!" he cried, beckoning for Mescal. She ran to him, and Paiute tied up Black Topper and followed. "Look, look!" cried Jack, pointing to a ridge to the left of the yellow crags. On the bare summit stood a magnificent stallion, silhouetted against the morning sky. He was an iron-gray, wild and proud, with a long silver-white mane blowing in the wind. "Silvermane, Silvermane!" exclaimed Mescal. "What a magnificent animal!" Jack stared at the horse for a moment before the stallion moved back along the ridge and disappeared. Other horses, blacks and bays, showed above the sage for a moment before disappearing as well. "He's got some of his band with him," said Jack, excitement in his voice. "Mescal, they're down off the upper range and grazing along easy. The wind favors us. That whistle was just plain fight, judging from what Justice told me of wild stallions." He reached the hilltop and let out a whistle of challenge to any horse, whether wild or domesticated, that may be lurking below. "I'll go through the cedars and block the trail leading towards the other range, while you and Paiute close the gate of our trail on this end. Then send Paiute down to inform Justice that we've got Silvermane," he ordered. Jack opted for the lowest part of the plateau's rim, where the cedars were dense, for his detour to get behind the wild band. He darted from one tree to another, avoiding the open spaces and taking advantage of the thickets, keeping away from the ridge. Although he had never gone as far as the gate, he knew where the trail led into a split in the crags. He climbed the slope and threaded his way over fallen cliffs until he reached the base of the wall. The tracks of the wild horse band were fresh and evident on the yellow trail. 4 sturdy posts guarded the opening, and several bars lay waiting to be pushed into place. He put them up, creating a 10-foot-high gate, an impervious barrier. After finishing, he hastened back to camp. "Jack, Topper needs more attention today than the sheep, unless I let her loose. She pulls and strains so much that she'll break that halter," Mescal informed him upon his return. "Does she want to go with the band?" Jack asked. "I don't want to think so, but Father Justice doesn't trust Topper, even though she's the best Mustang he ever broke," Mescal replied. "It's better to keep her in," Jack agreed, recalling Justice's warning. "I'll hobble her, so if she does break loose, she won't go far." When Mescal and Jack drove the sheep back to camp that afternoon, they noticed Paiute had returned with August Justice, Dave, and Billy, a string of mustangs, and a pack train of burros. "Hello, Mescal!" August shouted cheerfully as they arrived in camp. "Wow, Jack, you look great, man!" exclaimed August as he crushed Jack's hand in his own broad palm. "You filled out and got a nice tan. I don't have the gift of prophecy, but I'm sure you're going to recover fully," he added, his gray eyes beaming. Jack struggled to speak, but finally managed to thump his chest and smile. "Black sage and juniper!" August exclaimed. "This air is so pure, if a man doesn't catch pneumonia, he'll surely recover. I never doubted you, Jack. Thank God." August then asked Paiute and Mescal about the sheep and was pleased with their report. When Jack showed him the grizzly pelt and told him about the killing, August shook his head and asked Mescal to tell the story instead. She recounted the tale accurately, and August's hand resounded on Jack's shoulder in approval. August then noticed the pile of coyote skins under the stone shelf and was delighted. He then turned his attention to the reason for his trip to the plateau. "So, you've corralled Silvermane?" August asked Jack. "If he doesn't jump off the cliff, he's ours. He can't get away any other way. How many horses were with him?" "We didn't get a chance to count, but I saw at least 12, Jack replied. "Good. He's out with his chosen band. Weren't they all blacks and bays?" August asked. "Yes," Jack confirmed. "The history of that stallion wouldn't make you proud of him, Jack. We've only caught him by chance. If I'm not mistaken, he's after Topper. He's caused a lot of trouble for ranchers all the way from the Nevada line across Utah. He's killed stallions and led off mares." "Dave, should we try to thirst him out or build a long corral?" August asked. "Let's take a look around tomorrow," Dave replied. "We're going to have to chase him down," said one of the cowboys. "But we don't have a trap corral to catch him in. It's going to be a tough one." Mescal was asked if Topper had been behaving since Silvermane appeared. "Nope," she replied, and went on to explain what had been happening. "She'll be fine," said Billy Justice. "Any Mustang can do that. Just keep her belled and hobbled." Dave scoffed at Billy's suggestion. "If Silvermane wants Topper, he's not going to care about a bell and hobble. We need to keep her roped and haltered." August agreed with Dave. "You can't trust a wild Mustang any more than a wild horse." As it turned out, August was right. Black Topper broke free from her halter in the middle of the night and ran off into the forest, despite being hobbled. The Indian heard her first and woke up August, who woke up the others. "Be quiet," August warned as Jack came up. "There's going to be some action soon. Topper's loose, and I think Silvermane is close. Listen carefully." With the breeze in their favor and the campfire extinguished, they heard the shrill neigh of a Mustang. "What do you think of that?" whispered Billy. "It was Topper, no doubt," replied Dave. "That wild mare spirit in her blood can't be broken." "Let's stay low and wait for him to come close," suggested Billy. "We don't know if she's whistling for Silvermane or warning him." They all listened intently, and after a while they heard the faint rattling of stones coming from the direction of the ridge. "They're on their way," Billy announced. The sound of sharp clicks preceded the rattles, and the noises began to blend into a rhythmic tramp. It softened occasionally, possibly when the horses were under the cedars, and grew louder as they emerged on the harder ground of the open. "I see them," Dave whispered. A black rippling line snaked out of the cedars, a group of horses approaching with drooping heads, hurrying a little as they neared the spring. "There's around 20, all blacks and bays," August reported, "and some of them are Mustangs. But where's Silvermane? Listen." From the cedars, the distinct halting thump of a hobbled horse trying to move quickly rose, followed by snorts and the sound of crashing brush and pounding hooves. The long black line came to a halt and began to stamp. Then 2 silhouettes appeared in the starlit glade below. The first, a magnificent gray horse with a snowy mane. The second, a small, glossy black Mustang. "Silvermane and Topper!" August exclaimed. "And now she's broken free from her hobbles." The stallion was magnificent in action, displaying the actions of a master as he wheeled around her, neighing and plunging, arching his splendid neck and pushing his head against her. Suddenly, Black Topper snorted and spun down the glade. Silvermane whistled one blast of anger or terror and thundered after her. They vanished into the shadow of the cedars, and the group of frightened horses and Mustangs clattered after them. "She got one over on me," Billy commented. "That small mare played us at the end. She was caught when she was a yearling, trained better than any Mustang we ever had, and has helped us run down many a stallion, and now she ran off with that big white-maned brute." "They'll make a great team, and if they get away we'll have to chase them to the Great Salt Basin," Dave responded. "Well-behaved Mustang you have there, Mescal," August commented. "Not only did she break loose, but she also whistled an alarm to Silvermane and his crew. All right, everyone, let's roll in and get some sleep." During breakfast the next day, the justices discussed the possibility of other exits from the plateau besides the 2 already closed off. They had never brought any Mustangs up there, and with a wild horse like Silvermane, who would take any risk, it was important to know the area. Billy and Dave grabbed their horses from the sheep corral where they had been kept for the night, and rode in opposite directions around the triangular plateau, which was around 6 or 7 miles in circumference. They completed the ride in under an hour. "Corralled," Dave reported. "Good. Did you see him? What kind of crew does he have with him?" their father asked. "If we can get the best of the lot, it will be worth 2 weeks' work," Dave replied. "I saw him and Topper, too. I think we can easily catch her. She was away from the rest, and it seemed like the mares were jealous. We can lure her into a cove under the wall and catch her. Then Mescal can help us capture the stallion. You can watch out for the best level stretch on this end to set up the line of cedars and trap them." The brothers rode off into the forest at their father's signal. Justice held on to the peon and gave him instructions before sending him off. "Tonight you can stand on the rim here and watch him signal across to the top of Echo Cliffs to the Navajos," August told Jack. "I've summoned the best Mustang breaker in the desert." Langford was in need of someone to break a wild Mustang, and he wanted the best man for the job. While Dave and Paiute were skilled, Langford desired nothing but the finest for this magnificent horse that he intended to gift to someone. Langford had chosen Justice, a Navajo man who was known to be the best in the country at breaking wild Mustangs. Justice explained to Langford that no white man could break a wild Mustang as effectively, and he suspected it was due to bad temper and impatience. After Mescal and Paiute finished driving down the sheep, Jack joined Justice at the corral. Justice had brought up Jack's saddle and told him he could choose any Mustang to ride. The feeling of being back in the saddle was a great pleasure for Jack, and he rode with August all over the western end of the plateau. They eventually stumbled upon a strip of land that was perfect for their plan. It was a mile long and narrow, with a wall of rock on one end and a forest on the other. August was pleased with their find and explained their plan to Jack. They would cut cedars and drag them in a line to create a big corral against the rock. From the opening in the corral, they would build 2 fences of trees. Then they would chase Silvermane, the wild Mustang, until he was exhausted and run him down into the level where they would turn him inside the fence. Justice assured Jack that no horse could break through a close line of cedars. They would rope him once he was inside the corral. Jack was thrilled with the plan and couldn't wait to see it in action. "Well, isn't this going to be a lot of work?" August gave a dry chuckle in response. "More than a week just to cut and haul those cedars, not to mention tiring out that wild stallion. But when the time comes, we want to be up on that ledge where we'll have the corral." After returning to camp, they got to work on supper. Mescal and Paiute arrived soon after, followed by Dave and Billy on their tired Mustangs. Black Topper limped in last, her coat dusty and foam-stained, with a long halter dragging behind her. "Not too bad," August said, examining the lame leg. "She'll be good as new in a few days, well before we need her to help catch Silvermane. Someone grab the liniment and a cloth and put her in the sheep corral for the night." Mescal's love for Topper was evident as she smoothed out the mare's mane and petted her neck. "Oh, Topper, I can't believe you did it." The mare hung her head as if ashamed. As night fell, they gathered on the rim to watch for the signals. A fire blazed below in the darkness and grew brighter as they waited. "Ugh!" Paiute pointed across to the cliffs. "Of course he'd see it first," Justice laughed. "Dave, can you see it yet? Jack, check if there's a fire over on Echo Cliffs." "I don't see anything except for that white star. Have you seen it?" Dave asked. "I saw it ages ago," Justice replied. "Here, look along my finger and squint." "I think I see it, yeah, I'm sure," Jack said. "Great. Mescal, can you see it?" August asked. "Yes," she replied. Jack found it amusing that Dave claimed he was next to the Indian and Billy claimed he had seen it first. But to these men who were born and raised in the desert, having sharp eyesight was the most important skill. "Jack, keep an eye out," August said. "Peon is putting out his fire. See the flicker? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Jack scanned the starry sky above and the dark abyss below. He spotted a tiny and steady light far across the distance. The Indian made a grunting noise, and August let out a loud "Ha!" Suddenly the light blinked like a star, went out for a second, and blinked again. "That's a good sign," said August. "We've got our answer. Now it's time to get to work." The next day Jack worked hard with the brothers, cutting down cedars while August hauled them into line with his horse. They spent almost a week doing this labor along with other camp duties. Black Topper, the horse, recovered from her lameness during this time. Twice they spotted Silvermane, the stallion, standing on high ridges, always watching and looking suspicious. "I wonder how long he can go without water," Dave commented. "But we'll make him thirsty tomorrow. It would serve him right to break him with Black Topper." The next day was warm and misty as the sun rose over the desert. Dave and Billy Justice mounted their Mustangs and led another horse each by a halter. "We'll go to the ridge, cut Silvermane out of his band, and chase him down to this end," they said. Langford was eager to get started, but August took his time preparing. He punched new holes in his saddle girth, adjusted his stirrups, and smoothed out kinks in his lasso. Finally, they were ready. August saddled the roan and Black Topper, while Mescal came out of her tent wearing a short buckskin skirt and matching leggings. Her black hair was braided and held back by a double band. Langford strolled leisurely, leading 2 Mustangs by their halters. Justice and Mescal rode on horseback, each of them followed by 2 other spare mounts. August fastened 3 Mustangs at one point along the level stretch and 3 at another. Then he led Mescal and Jack to the top of the stone wall above the corral, where they had a good view of a considerable part of the plateau. The eastern slope of sage and juniper was in plain sight. Langford spotted a white flash. Then Silvermane burst out of the cedars into the sage. One of the brothers raced him half the length of the slope, and then the other, coming out, blocked him off down toward the forest. Soon the sound of galloping hoofs became louder and nearer. Silvermane emerged straight ahead on the open level. He ran with ease. "He hasn't opened up yet," said August. Langford watched the stallion with sheer fascination. He ran effortlessly. What a stride he had! How beautifully his silver mane waved in the wind! He veered off to the left, out of sight in the brush, while Dave and Billy galloped up to the spot where August had tied the first 3 Mustangs. Here they dismounted, changed saddles to fresh horses, and were off again. The chase was now close and all downhill for the watchers. Silvermane darted in and out among the cedars and suddenly stopped short on the rim. He turned and ran away toward the crags, disappearing from view. But soon he reappeared, for Billy had cut across and faced him. Again he raced along the level stretch. Dave was there in front of him. He darted away to the left and flashed through the glades beyond. The brothers saved their horses, content to keep him cornered in that end of the plateau. Then August spurred his roan into the scene of action. Silvermane came out on the one piece of rising ground beyond the level and stood looking backward toward the brothers. As the great roan horse crashed through the thickets, the justices sprang into action. Dave and Billy positioned themselves at the broad end of a triangle, while August stood at the apex. August chased the horse up and down, across the rim and to the line of cedars, always driving him towards the open stretch. The stallion fled with flying mane, but the relentless brothers were always there to check him. Langford had never seen riding quite like it. The brothers took advantage of brief periods when the stallion was heading towards August, switching their tired Mustangs for fresh ones. Then came August's call for Mescal to put Black Topper after Silvermane. Mescal's fleetness made the other Mustangs seem slow. In a flash she was round the corral, with Silvermane between her and the long fence of cedars. The gray stallion lunged out, panic-stricken for the first time, and lengthened his stride in a wonderful way. He raced down the stretch with his head over his shoulder, watching the little black. Seeing her gaining, he burst into desperate headlong flight. He won that first race down the level, but it had cost him his best. If he had been fresh, he might have left Black Topper far behind, but now he could not elude her. August Justice let him run this time, and Silvermane, keeping close to the fence, passed the gate, ran down to the rim, and wheeled. The black Mustang was on him again, holding him in close to the fence, driving him back down the stretch. The brothers remorselessly turned him, and now Mescal, forcing the running, caught him, lashed his haunches with her whip, and drove him into the gate of the corral. August and his 2 sons, Dave and Billy, were hot on the heels of the magnificent Silvermane as he raced towards the corral. The horse's energy was almost spent, and he was almost within their grasp. "Hold on, boys," said August. "I'll go in and wear him down, and when I yell, you stand aside and rope him as he comes out." Silvermane ran around the corral, his sides heaving and his breath coming in gasps. He tried to climb the steep walls, but his strength was failing. As fear took over, he ran blindly, his eyes wild with terror. Every time he passed the gate, he looked more desperate, and his movements grew more labored. "Now!" August yelled, and the boys sprang into action. Mescal drew back from the gate, and Dave and Billy swung their lassos loosely, waiting for their chance. Silvermane sprang towards the opening, his speed returning. But as he went through, 2 yellow loops flashed in the sun, circling and tightening around his neck and head. Dave's Mustang staggered under the shock but held firm, while Bill's mount slid on his haunches, and Bill was thrown from the saddle. Silvermane seemed to be lifted into the air, but August darted through the gate, his lasso flying, and caught the horse's right foreleg. Silvermane crashed to the ground, his hooves striking sparks from the stones, and he struggled convulsively for a moment before falling still. In a flash, Billy loosened his lasso and made a halter from it, tying the end to a cedar stump. The justices stepped back to admire their prize. Silvermane was exhausted, his coat slick with sweat, but there was no blood on his mane and only a few scratches on his skin. After a few moments he struggled to his feet, panting and trembling, but still magnificent. The poor horse looked like he had been through a lot. His head was drooping down, but he didn't seem angry or aggressive, just scared like an animal that was caught in a trap. He glanced over at Black Topper and then back at the halter, as if he knew that the two were linked together in some terrible way. Chapter 8. After Silvermane's capture, Langford was filled with excitement. However, he noticed that Mescal was avoiding him and only greeted him in the morning and evening. Langford wanted to speak with her alone, but she always retired to her tent early or went to the rim at sunset. Langford grew frustrated and decided to confront Mescal. He found her in the pasture where she was shepherding the flock. Langford asked, "Mescal, why are you avoiding me? What has happened?" Mescal looked tired and unhappy, and her gaze wandered to the crags. "Nothing," she replied. Langford persisted. "But there must be something. You have given me no chance to talk to you, and I wanted to know if you'd let me speak to Father Justice." "To Father Justice? Why, what about?" Mescal replied. "About you, of course, and me. I love you and want to marry you," Langford confessed. Mescal turned white and shook her head. "No, no." Langford was taken aback by her refusal and the fear in her face. "Why not?" he asked, sensing that there was more to the situation than Mescal's shyness. "Because he'll be terribly angry," Mescal replied. "Angry? I don't understand. Why angry?" Langford asked. Mescal did not answer and looked forlorn. Langford attempted to embrace her, but she resisted and broke away from him. "Never ever do that again," Langford said sternly. Mescal stepped back in surprise. "What's wrong?" "You gotta tell me," she replied. "I remembered," Mescal admitted, hanging her head. "Remembered what?" Langford asked. "I'm supposed to marry Father Justice's eldest son," Mescal revealed. Langford was confused. "What did you say?" he asked slowly. Mescal repeated herself quietly. But Mescal, I love you. You let me kiss you," Langford said, struggling to understand. "Oh, Jack, I forgot," Mescal cried. "It was so new and strange to have you here, it felt like a dream. But after you kissed me, I found out—" "What, Mescal?" Langford prompted. Mescal remained silent. "But if you really love me, you can't marry someone else," Langford pleaded. "It's impossible," Mescal replied, her voice full of despair. Langford's anger flared up. "You let me believe I had won you." "What kind of girl are you? Your actions were lies," he shouted. "Not lies," Mescal corrected weakly, turning away. Langford grabbed her arm roughly and forced her to face him, but when he saw the tears in her eyes, he softened and pulled her into a tight embrace. "It can't be a lie. You do care for me, love me, look at me," he said, tilting her chin up. He kissed her tenderly, unable to resist her sweet presence. "I love you, Mescal," he whispered. "You're mine, I'll have you, I won't let him have you." He spoke with conviction, and she felt it reverberate through her like a string being plucked. In an instant, the trembling girl transformed. She became supple and pliant in his arms, with a smoldering fire in her eyes. "You do love me, Mescal?" he asked. "I couldn't help it," she replied. There was a tense pause. "Mescal, tell me about your pledge," he said finally. "I gave him my promise because there was nothing else to do. I was pledged to him in the church at White Sage. I have to marry Father Justice's eldest son." "Eldest son?" Jack repeated, realizing the implication. "Snap Justice, I hate him." "You hate him and you're pledged to marry him. And you've forgotten he already has a wife," Mescal said. "I had forgotten." "Are you a Mormon?" Jack asked bluntly. "I've been raised as one," Mescal replied, "but I don't believe any man should have more than one wife at a time." "Wouldn't Father Justice release you?" Jack asked. "He would have taken me as a wife for himself, but Mother Mary hates me, so he pledged me to Snap," Mescal explained. "Does August Justice love you?" Jack asked. "No, not in the way you mean, perhaps as a daughter, but Mormons teach duty to the church first and say such love comes to wives afterward." "It doesn't happen with the women I've seen," Langford said. "There's Mother Ruth, and her heart is broken. She loves me, and I can tell." "When is this marriage supposed to happen?" "I don't know. Father Justice promised me to his son when he came back from the Navajo range. It would be soon if they found out about you and me. Snap Justice would kill you." The girl was startled by the sudden thought. Her eyes betrayed her terror. "I might not be so easy to kill," Langford said darkly. The words came unbidden, his first answer to the wild influences around him. "Mescal, I'm sorry. Maybe I've caused you unhappiness." No, being with you has been like sitting on the rim and watching the desert. It's the greatest happiness I've ever known. I used to love being with the children, but Mother Mary forbade it. When I'm down there, which is rare, I'm not allowed to play with the children anymore." "What can I do?" Langford asked passionately. "Don't speak to Father Justice. Don't let him figure it out. Don't leave me here alone," she answered softly. It wasn't the Navajo speaking in her now. Love had sounded depths previously unknown. A quick, soft impulsiveness made the contrast sharp and vivid. "How can I not leave you if he wants me on the cattle ranges?" "I don't know. You have to think. He's been so pleased with what you've done. He's had Mormons up here and 2 men not of his church, and they did nothing. You've been sick and you're different. He'll keep me with the sheep as long as he can for 2 reasons. First, because I'm the best at driving them, he says, and second, because Snap Justice's wife must be convinced to welcome me into her home." "I'll stay even if I have to get sick again and go back on my back," Jack declared. "I hate to lie to him, Mescal, but whether you're promised to him or not, I love you and I won't give up hope," Jack said, looking at her with determination. Mescal's hands flew to her face, trying to hide the dark blush that crept up. "Mescal, there's something I need to know. Does August Justice think he can make a Mormon out of me? Is that why he's been so kind?" "Of course he thinks he can make a Mormon out of you. That's his religion, and he feels that way about all strangers who come out here. But he'd be kind to them even if he didn't have that hope. I don't know the secret of his kindness, but I know he loves everyone and everything. And Jack, he's so good. I owe him my life. He didn't let the Navajos take me. He raised me, cared for me, and taught me. I can't break my promise to him. He's been like a father to me, and I love him." "I think I love him too," replied Langford simply. He left her at last and climbed high up among the tottering yellow crags. There he battled with himself. Whatever the charm of Mescal's surrender and the insistence of his love, stern hammer strokes of fairness, duty, and honor beat into his brain his debt to the man who had saved him. It was a long, drawn-out battle, not to be won merely by saying right was right. He loved Mescal, and she loved him. But something born in him with his new health, with the breath of this sage and juniper forest, with the sight of purple canyons and silent, beckoning desert, made him fiercely tenacious of all that life had come to mean for him. He couldn't give her up, and yet— Twilight forced Langford from his lofty retreat, and he trudged his way back to camp, weary and jaded but victorious over himself. He had come to terms with the fact that he may never see Mescal again. Jack had returned with a newfound commitment to being loyal to August and himself, refusing to let bitterness take hold of him. But there was a part of him that feared a new spirit rising within him, one that was just as unyielding and untamed as the desert itself. At supper, August announced that we had ridden down the last of Silvermane's band with the help of the Navajos, Jack recounted. "Tomorrow we'll start breaking Silvermane. Once that's done, August will leave and the Indians will bring the horses down when they're broken." Jack asked, "Are you leaving Silvermane with me?" August replied, "Of course, in 3 days he'll be like a lamb. Those desert stallions can be made into the finest saddle horses. I want you to stay up here with the sheep. You're getting better and will soon be a strong, capable young man. When we drive the sheep down in the fall, you can start working on the cattle ranges, driving wild steers. That's where you'll become lean and hard like an iron bar. You'll need that horse too." "Because he's fast?" Jack asked, sensing the unspoken warning. August nodded grimly. I don't have the gift of revelation, but I've come to believe Jacob Severino. Holderness is building an outpost for his riders close to Seeping Springs. He has no water. If he tries to take my water, then Beale is on the march this way. He's driven some of Marshall's cattle from the range next to mine. Beale got away with about 100 head. The bare-faced robber sold them in Lund to a buying company from Salt Lake. Is he openly an outlaw, a rustler? Langford asked. Everybody knows it, and he's finding White Sage and vicinity warmer than it was, August replied. Each time he and his gang come around, they cause quite a ruckus. The Mormons are known for their patience, but they're starting to get fed up. Outlaws have been pouring in from all over, but they won't be able to hold the same kind of power they once had. The Holderness types are the ones to watch out for. They're ranchers who are greedy and unscrupulous, but they're also hard to catch in their dishonesty. Beale is just a bad man, a gunfighter. He and others like him will eventually be driven out of Utah. Have you ever heard of Plummer, Matt Slade, or Boone Helm? They were all notorious bad men. Plummer was even a sheriff in Idaho, but he led the most dangerous gang of criminals in the West. He orchestrated the murder of or killed over 100 men. Slade was known for his quick draw and deadly aim, while Helm was a killing machine. All of these men tried to make a name for themselves in Utah and were eventually forced to leave. Beale will be no different, but things could get ugly before he's gone. When you're in the thick of it, you'll be grateful for Silvermane. I surely will, but I can't imagine a wild stallion with a saddle and bridle eating oats like any other horse and being led to water, Jack replied. Well, give it time. He'll come to you eventually if you're patient and gentle. Teach him to obey the slightest touch of the rein, to stand still when you dismount, and to come when you whistle. Always remember that he's a desert-bred horse. He can survive on minimal food and water. Don't break him of those natural instincts. If you're looking to keep your horse in good shape, there are a few things you should keep in mind. For one, make sure to avoid giving them grain if you can find some browse for them to eat instead. Additionally, it's important to only give them a drink when they truly need it, not nearly as often as a domesticated horse might require. By instilling these qualities of endurance in your horse, they'll be able to carry you out of a tough situation should you ever find yourself stranded in the desert. The next day, the justices, Indians, and Langford arrived to watch as August's stallion Silvermane was put to the test. A Navajo man, dressed only in a blanket and riding bareback on August's roan horse, Charger, made his way into the cedar corral where Silvermane was kept. The Navajo carried only a thick halter with a loop and a knot, and he rode with a steady gait as he circled the corral, seemingly unaware of Silvermane's presence. Despite Silvermane's initial fear and anger, the Navajo continued to circle the corral, slowly but surely getting closer and closer to the stallion. Silvermane tried to retreat to the farthest corner of the corral, but the Navajo persisted, and eventually the two horses were circling each other closely. Silvermane was clearly agitated, with his ears laid back and his eyes shooting sparks, but the Navajo remained calm and steady. Finally, the Navajo made his move, throwing his halter like a lasso and catching Silvermane's head. The stallion reared up, pawing at the air and letting out a long, shrill cry that was a mix of a whistle, a snort, and a screech. But the Navajo held fast, and eventually Silvermane calmed down, his fight replaced with a resigned acceptance of his capture. The stallion came charging down, barely missing Charger with his hooves, and skidded to a stop on his haunches. The Native American, with rippling bronze muscles, pulled on the rope and wrapped it around his bony wrist. In a cloud of dust, the roan horse closed in on the gray, and Silvermane took off in a wild race around the corral. The roan kept up, running nose to nose with him. When Silvermane realized he couldn't shake him, he snarled and bared his teeth, trying to bite, but the Indian quickly kicked him under the ear with his moccasined foot, pushing him back. The roan then hugged Silvermane so closely that the Navajo was virtually riding two horses at once. Only the stiffness of his arms and the sudden tension of his leg muscles showed that the Indian was working hard as he expertly rode the dangerous horse. Suddenly he let out a whoop, and August Justice opened the gate. The two horses thundered out neck and neck, and August cried out, "Let him rip now, Navvy. All that's left is the easy part, Jack. I was worried Silvermane might impale himself on those dead cedar spikes in the corral, but now he's safe." Jack watched as the horses raced at breakneck speed down the stretch, circled at the edge of the forest, and came back even faster. Silvermane was pulling the roan faster than he had ever gone before. but the Native American remained gracefully seated. The speed slowed on the second turn and kept decreasing as they ran mile after mile side by side. Langford, who had been watching the breaking of the stallion with interest, began to understand the Indian's restraint and the strain it put on the horse. Silvermane could never escape the huge roan, the tight halter, and the determined Navajo. The mustang was driven relentlessly, from gallop to trot to jog and finally to a slow walk. The man breaking the wild stallion did not use a whip or spur or even a word. His cruelty lay in his unwavering patience and his clear, determined goal. The stallion named Silvermane would have destroyed himself in a single frenzied dash, but the man's iron grip prevented it. Eventually, after hours of this grueling exercise, the Navajo led the exhausted Silvermane into a corral, where he was tied and left to rest. The next day, the Navajo returned with a blindfolded horse named Charger. He dragged Silvermane out of the corral and forced him to run relentlessly with no mercy or respite. At noon, he returned Silvermane to the corral and tied him up again, only to saddle him up and force him to run once more. This time, Silvermane carried a saddle, and at first he tried to shake it off with wild, desperate strides. However, as the day wore on, he grew tired and returned to the corral. On the third day, the Navajo roped Silvermane, saddled him, and whipped him until he was forced to lie down. The Navajo knelt on his head and quickly completed the process of breaking the wild stallion. When he was finished, Silvermane stood up with a bit between his teeth, a defeated but subdued horse. The Navajo sat firmly in his saddle, rising with each stride as Silvermane leaped through the corral gate and out onto the open stretch of land. With every step, the horse lengthened out and settled into a wild, desperate burst of speed. The white mane flowed in the wind, and the half-naked Navajo swayed with the motion. Horse and rider disappeared into the cedars, gone for the entire day. As night approached, they reappeared on the horizon. The Indian rode into camp and dismounted, handing the bridle rein over to August Justice without a word. His dark, impassive expression invited no comment. Silvermane was covered in dust and sweat. His silver crest still held the same proud beauty, his neck the same splendid arch, and his head the same noble outline. But his spirit was broken. "Here, my lad," August Justice said, tossing the bridle rein to Langford's arm. "Do you remember what I said about seeing you on a great gray horse? Well, take him and know this: you've got the swiftest horse in this desert country." Chapter 9. The shepherds were soon left to a peaceful silence that was uninterrupted by the sounds of wild mustangs or the clanging of iron-shod hooves on the rocky terrain. The only familiar sounds were the bleating of sheep, the barks of coyotes, and the screams of eagles that accentuated the quietness of the plateau. For Langford, time seemed to come to a standstill. He did not think much. His whole life was based on external feelings. He would rise at dawn, never missing the sight of the red sun touching the eastern crags. He would feel invigorated by the touch of cold spring water in the morning air. He would follow Silvermane under the cedars and feel thrilled when the stallion responded to his call, thumping the ground with hobbled feet and coming his way. With time, Silvermane learned to be happy at the sight of his master. Langford would ride with Mescal behind the flock, and for hours on end he would hunt, crawling over the fragrant brown mats of cedar, through the sage and juniper, up the grassy slopes. As they drove the sheep back to camp, Mescal and Langford rode side by side. Jack urged Silvermane to run faster than Black Topper, the horse that had beaten his beloved gray in a previous race. The sun was setting and the campfire was already lit, smoke curling up into the sky. Paiute had been busy with his farming, and they enjoyed a hearty supper. The desert landscape was always changing, and the wind rustled through the cedars. The stars twinkled brightly in the sky, and they slept soundly. Mescal and Langford spent every moment together, working tirelessly to care for their horses and flock. They rarely spoke of their love, but their glances and smiles spoke volumes. Jack had become quieter, content to simply watch Mescal and appreciate her beauty. Sometimes he couldn't help but ask her what she was thinking. She would gaze off into the distance, her eyes full of sadness and mystery, before turning back to him with a puzzled look. "I wasn't thinking," she would say, though he could tell there was more to her thoughts than she let on. "Do you ever think about going to the Navajos?" asked Langford. "No," replied Mescal. Or crossing the painted desert to find some place you seem to know or see?" "No," she repeated. "I don't know why, but sometimes when I catch you watching me, I get the strangest ideas," Langford continued. "You look happy and sad at the same time, like you see something out there that I can't. Your eyes are haunted. I have this feeling that if I looked into them, I would see the sun setting, the clouds coloring, the twilight shadows changing, and then back of that, the secret of it all. I can't explain it, but it feels like you hold some kind of mystery." "I never had a secret except the one you know," Mescal replied. "You always ask me what I think about, and you always ask me when we're here. I don't think at all until you make me. It's beautiful out there, but that's not what it is to me. When I sit down here, everything within me is stilled. I watch, and it's different from what it is now since you've made me think. Then I watch and I see. That's all." Later, Langford realized that Mescal's purposeless yet all-satisfying gaze had become a part of his own experience. He couldn't understand it, but he had a feeling that something would happen to them out there on the desert. When they returned to the campfire, the darkness of the night shut in the blaze-lit circle, and the immensity of their wild environment lost its paralyzing effect. Langford became talkative and fell into a chatty mood. Mescal's personality had undergone a transformation. Once silent and reserved, she now exuded vivacity and ambition. She was more human-like, resembling the girls he had known in the East. Her newfound complexity fascinated him even more. Unfortunately, the July rains never arrived, and the lack of mist and dew caused the hot sun to take its toll on everyone, including the shepherds and sheep. They all sought refuge in the shade as the flowers began to wilt and wither away. Only the cactus and Indian paintbrush, the flowers of the sun, remained resilient in the heat. The shepherds kept a watchful eye on the sky, hoping for storm clouds that never appeared. The spring ran lower and lower until the ditch that carried water to the corral dried up completely, and the pool had begun to recede. It was then that Mescal sent Paiute to fetch August Justice. August arrived the next day with Dave and immediately ordered the camp to be broken up. "It will rain eventually," he said, "but we can't wait any longer. Dave, when was the last time you saw the Blue Star waterhole?" 10 days ago on the trip in from Silver Cup. It was full then," replied Dave. "Will there be enough water now?" asked August. "We'll have to take our chances. There's no water here, and there are no springs on the upper range where we can drive the sheep. We'll have to go around under the Star," said Dave. August's fears needed confirmation, but his hopes always influenced his judgment until there was no hope left. "I wish I had brought Zeke and George. It'll be a hard drive, though we've got Jack and Mescal to help," he said. Despite the scorching heat, August wasted no time in getting the flock moving. Paiute led the way on foot, and the sheep, accustomed to following him, started to move along quickly. Dave and Mescal rode along on either side, while August and Jack brought up the rear with the pack burros. The wolf kept a close eye on the lambs, circling them in and keeping them in line. The drive up to the upper range was an easy ascent, with the trail winding under crags and climbing long slopes. At the summit, the trail forked, with one path ascending and the other, which Paiute took, beginning to descend. The view was limited, with the trail mostly shut in on the left, but Langford could see the flock of sheep on the descending trail at times. Once the descent began, there was no stopping the flock, which made Paiute's job even harder. With more than 3,000 sheep strung out between them, Langford could have tossed a pebble on Paiute at times. The drive continued with clouds of dust and the steady ba-ba-ba filling the air. Despite a few mishaps with lambs straying off the trail and sheep jamming in corners, the drive went on smoothly. Langford was relieved to see the lambs scramble back to their mothers and the sheep make space for those behind them. As they approached a wide break in the wall, Langford knew they would soon be safe on the level ground. However, a blast of hot air hit them as they approached, carrying a dust-laden smell and an unpleasant odor. The sheep massed together on the level, and the drivers spread out to their positions. The trail ran beneath towering red cliffs wedged between the base and massive chunks of rock that had broken away and fallen far below. The wind had stripped away any loose particles and eroded the stone into hollowed shapes, leaving a rugged landscape in its wake. This area of the canyon gave way to a sloping stream of red sand that flowed from the canyon wall. Paiute guided the flock to the left, leading them into an amphitheater where they huddled together against the wall. Dave Justice rode back towards August and Langford, shouting, "The waterhole's blocked." "What do you mean, Dave?" his father yelled back. "It's completely filled with stones and sand, no water in sight." "Could it have been a cave-in?" August asked. "I don't think so. There hasn't been any rain," Dave replied. August spurred his horse after Dave, with Langford following closely behind until they reached the waterhole. What had once been a source of water was now a heap of shale, stones, and sand. The sheep were bleating in distress. August dismounted and climbed up the slope to investigate, then strode back down with clenched fists and his gray mane shaking like a lion's. "I found the tracks. Someone climbed up and rolled the stones, causing the cave-in. But who?" he exclaimed. "Holderness's men did the same thing to Jacob Severino's waterhole at Rocky Point," Langford chimed in. "How old are the tracks?" "About 2 days old, I'd say. We can't follow them." "What can we do?" August replied. "Some of Holderness's men are Mormons and others are decent folks. They wouldn't stand for this kind of work, and someone needs to ride in and tell them," Langford suggested. "But that person would risk getting shot by the men paid to do the dirty work. No, I won't allow it. This isn't a big deal anyway. We only use this waterhole twice a year when driving the flock," August said firmly. "I'm worried about Silver Cup and Seeping Springs," August Justice said. "If this wind doesn't change soon, the sheep are in trouble." Langford turned to Dave. "Why did those men fill up the waterhole?" "Holderness wants to cut us off from Silver Cup Spring," Dave replied. "This was a halfway waterhole that he didn't know we had the sheep upland. He's trying to get our cattle range, and he'll stop at nothing. Things don't look good for us." "If Holderness works his way to Silver Cup, how will he steal another man's range and water?" Langford asked. "He'll build a cabin, send in his men, and drive in 10,000 steers," Dave answered. "His men won't try to keep us away from our own water or cattle, but they'll pretend to welcome us and drive our cattle away when we're not there. There are only 5 of us to ride the ranges, and we'd need 25 to watch all the stock." "Then you can't stop this outrage?" Langford asked. "There's only one way," Dave said, tapping the black handle of his Colt. "Holderness thinks he can fool us by talking about the cattle company that employs him." As the sun set under a crimson veil, August paced before his tired and thirsty flock. The wind died down, and the scent of the river grew faint. They decided to camp there for the night and start the drive at dawn. Twilight faded to darkness as they settled in, worried about what the future held. Despite the odds against them, Father never gave up hope and saw good in even his worst enemies. "He's the company himself, and he's in cahoots with Beale," said one of the cowboys. Langford was intrigued. "What would happen if my father and I rode over to Holderness's newest stand and told him to get off?" he asked. "We'd never make it there together," replied the cowboy. "If one of us went alone, we might be able to see him, especially in White Sage. But if we all went together, we'd have to fight his men before we even reached the corrals. And when you come out with us on the ranges, you'll find it pretty warm. White Sage is especially hot for you. They call you Beale's spy there, and the rustlers are still after you, but don't worry about it." "Why not?" asked Langford. "Well, if you're like the other Gentiles who have come into Utah, you won't have any qualms about drawing your gun. Your father says you're as quick as he is and can beat any rifle shot he's ever seen. And that long-barreled gun you've got can shoot a mile, so if it comes down to shooting, you can handle it. And if you need to run, who's going to catch you on that white-maned stallion? George and I talked about you, and we're glad you're well enough to ride with us." Langford thought about this conversation for a long time that night. The range life was opening up to him, and he couldn't help but feel eager and reckless for the long rides on the windy open. He remembered the years of his illness, the narrow room with the lamp and the book, and the tears over stories and dreams of adventure that he thought would never come true. But now life was wonderful and full of possibilities. Lying on the ground, exposed to the open sky, he gazed up at the towering black cliff, its wind-worn star of blue shining above him. He knew he was standing at the threshold of the desert, waiting for its subtle mystery to unfold. He was on the brink of a strenuous action on the ranges, alongside his somber Mormon companions, facing their peril and making their cause his own. Would he be worthy of their friendship and confidence? Could he live up to their simple estimation of him? He pondered these questions, wondering if he would fail at the pinch. He knew he had to become a better man to earn their trust. He had found health and strength, he was a skilled shooter, and he had the fastest horse on the desert. But he knew these were only reasons for their trust, not their friendship. Yet August Justice loved him, Mescal loved him, Dave and George treated him like a brother. "They shall have my life," he muttered, determined to prove himself to them. The bleating of the sheep signaled the start of another day. They drove the flock over the sand, seeking shelter under the cool and fresh shade of the cliff. The sheep made good progress, but as the sun rose higher, the shade receded and the wind picked up. Fine sand swirled around them, making it difficult to move forward. Paiute led the way, holding the king ram, Old Soccer, the leader of the flock. Mescal and Langford rode at the right, shielding their faces from the sand-filled puffs of wind. August and Dave drove behind, with Wolf, their trusty dog, taking care of the stragglers. The first hour went by without any signs of distress, and August's voice was filled with cheer. But as the sun beat down and the wind grew stronger, the sheep began to struggle. They had to be urged on by the whip, the horse's knees, and Wolf's bark. They stopped altogether during the frequent hot sand blasts and could not be driven. Time dragged on, and the journey seemed endless. The herd of sheep trailed out in a long, uneven line. Some of the rams refused to move until they were ready, while others lay down to rest. Some of the lambs even fell behind. However, eventually they reached the end of the sandy terrain, and August Justice drove the stragglers onto a stony bench. The sun was already 2 hours past its peak, and the red walls of the desert were closing in. The V-shaped split where the Colorado cut through was in sight. The trail was now broad and clear, and the distance was not far. However, August Justice kept turning his head to face the canyon with a look of anxious foreboding. Langford quickly realized that the sheep were behaving in a new and unusual way. They were now packing densely together, crowding forward, and many of them were raising their heads over the haunches of others and bleating. They were not in their usual calm and collected hurry, but were nervous, excited, and continually facing west toward the canyon with their noses up in the air. When they reached the top of the next little ridge, Langford heard Silvermane snort as he did when led to drink. There was a scent of water on the wind, and Langford caught it, a damp and muggy smell. The sheep had noticed it long before, and now, under its stronger influence, they began to bleat wildly, run faster, and crowd without any clear direction. August ordered everyone to keep the sheep packed and moving and to turn the wheelers. What was once a drive quickly turned into a flight, and it was all the better so long as the sheep headed straight up the trail. Paiute had to go to the right to avoid being run down, and Mescal rode up to fill his place. Langford followed Dave's lead and rode along the flank, crowding the sheep inward. August cracked his whip behind them. For half a mile the flock stayed on the trail, but then, as if by common consent, they sheered off to the right. With this move, August and Dave were transformed from being quiet and composed to a state of frenzy. They charged to the front, straight into the midst of the turning sheep, and pushed them back. The rear of the flock started to curve outward. "Move them in," shouted August. Langford urged Silvermane to chase the sheep and scare them into a line. Wolf was no longer able to pursue the stragglers. They had to be redirected by a horse. All along the flank, noses pointed outward. Some sheep, wilder than others, jumped ahead to lead a growing wave of woolly backs. Mescal, Langford, Dave, and August rode to different points, while August's horse charged up and down the constantly shifting line. Meanwhile, as the shepherds battled the sheep, the flock continued to run faster towards the east, further into the canyon. Both sides made progress, but the flock made more progress towards the canyon than the drivers did towards the oasis. Langford realized that the flock was in grave danger from August's hoarse cries, Dave's stern expression and constant swift movements, and the growing noise. He heard the roar of the river rapids and thought that the sheep could hear it too. They went wild from the scent and sound of water. Their eyes glowed red and their tongues hung out. The great mass of sheep rushed with no direction, but they followed the leaders, and the leaders followed the scent. And the drivers rode ahead to stop them, continuously riding forward to prevent one outbreak and then turning backward to stop another. The flight turned into a rout. Langford was in the middle of the dust and noise, the terrified jumping mob, and the ever-expanding streams of sheep, riding, yelling, and firing his colt. Dust choked him, the sun burned him, and flying pebbles cut his cheek. Once he caught a glimpse of Black Topper in a haze of dust and sheep. Dave's Mustang was blurry in his vision, and August's roan seemed to be in two places at once. Without warning, Silvermane charged ahead of the rest. The sheep were on the brink of victory. Their noses pointed towards the water, and nothing could stand in their way. But the drivers persisted, fighting tirelessly and refusing to give up. As they approached the last incline, a gentle slope that led to a dark break in the desert, the situation turned into a stampede. The line stretched out and swung around, the flanks on either side splitting the streams and flowing together in a single, unstoppable river of sheep. Mescal made sure Topper was safe, while Dave avoided the right flank. August and Langford were carried along with the flood until the horses caught sight of the dark canyon and came to a sudden stop, their bodies as immovable as rocks. Langford cried out in horror, "Will they run over the rim?" His voice was barely a whisper. August Justice, covered in red dust and sweat stains, his gray hair streaming in the wind, raised his arms above his head in despair. The long line of woolly creatures, nodding in unison like the crest of a yellow wave, plunged over the canyon rim in a rounded billow. The sound of hooves and bleats filled the air as the sheep spilled over the precipice, creating a deafening roar that echoed throughout the canyon like an avalanche. It seemed like an eternity as the sheep continued their fatal plunge, the last line of them turning their eyes too late to the brink, carried over by their own momentum. Finally, the sliding roar ceased, replaced by a muffled and hollow echo that pealed from the cliffs before rumbling down the canyon and merging with the sullen, dull, continuous sound of the rapids. Langford finally turned away from the dark, narrow canyon whose depths he hadn't seen and had no interest in exploring. As he glanced around, his gaze landed on a tiny Navajo lamb hobbling along behind the rest of the flock. The little creature was determinedly making its way towards the canyon, just like its mother. Langford quickly dismounted his horse and scooped up the lamb, marveling at what he saw next. The lamb was wearing a string and bell around its neck. It belonged to Mescal. Langford couldn't believe his luck. He had stumbled upon Mescal's beloved pet.